Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. Turiya has been one of the first guests on the podcast in season 1, and our first episode has since then been the most listened to episode ever, which has just reached over 1,000 individual downloads over the course of the last 18 months. I love speaking with Turiya because we share a passion in relation to the healing from trauma and grief and understanding the self in a deeper sense. This is also why this is not just the second, but actually the third episode. Today we're going to delve into the connection between trauma and grief. I hope you enjoy today's episode as much as I do. About this week's guest. Turiya is the co-founder of Path Retreats and the transformational process Path of Love with Rafia Morgan. Together they also lead a 1-year holistic counselor training for therapists called Working with People, School of Counselling. She has been trained in many different modalities such as Gestalt, Bioenergetics, Psychodrama, family therapy, NLP Hypnosis, Somatic Experiencing, Eco-psychology, family Constellation, Enneagram and Astrology, and essence work. Turiya's personal journey into human development started when she did her first 2-year Jungian psychotherapy course aged 22, followed by an encounter workshop in 1970 in Germany. The revelation and exploration in this humanistic psychology approach took Turiya by surprise. The internal shifts that she experienced was so profound that she and her husband set on a new course of human discovery, which led them to India. Through learning meditation, living and working in a community under the guidance of a master, she developed a unique approach in working with people that is a synthesis of Eastern insights, living awareness, and Western approach to humanistic psychology. The sudden and unexpected death of her husband and the death of her beloved friend marked a turning point in Turiya's life. These profound experiences with death deeply influenced her own personal search and how she works with people today. Today, Turiya has the joy of being a grandmother and spends her free time painting and is writing a book about the rising of the feminine and about death as a friend and the realization of impermanence. So welcome, Turiya. It's so nice to have you here for us to spend time with you again on the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you for inviting me, Natalie, and I love talking to you like this, and because it brings things to the essential, and that's what I'm most interested in.
And so, we absolutely share this passion, as I just said. And for those of you who don't know Turiya, which I would be surprised as you listen to this, but go back to episode number 4, which is in season 1, which is the first episode, and then go and listen to episode number 26, which is in season 3, which are the other informations about Turiya that you want to maybe start with before listening to this, because we are going to dive right into the topic of today. So, as we just started talking before, tomorrow is the 2nd anniversary of the death of your beloved friend, Maya, and we spoke multiple times about how you dealt with that. And so this is now an interesting other way to say, okay, how is it now? How do you feel about this now with the test of time, with all the things that have happened interveningly, and for you to be here today with that in mind?
Of course, as you said, time really heals. It is really true. The further away you get from it, then the less present are the physical memories, and then I have more the being or the connection memories. Yeah. So it is really I'm actually I just come back from working with people, so I'm actually in a very, I feel in a very sensitive space, but also in a very good space. It feels like suddenly the last 4 weeks or something, suddenly something inside of me expanded into a more light and, joyful space. I don't know, more life accepting. Let's call it like that, So I feel like I found a place also in being alone and not anymore missing that I'm only half because it is missing, but I'm more settled into my aloneness. I spend quite a bit of time meditating, focusing on the inner space. And after you come through the trauma and the missing and the loss, what is so intense it's really intense for a while, but now it's more that inner space is more nourishing me. I feel like I come to a place where I feel nourished when I sit with my inner infinite space, call it whatever you want to call it, just be with what is there every day. So meditation really, really helped me, and of course being in nature, and of course working. Mm-hmm. When I work with people, then a lot of what I have gone through touches also other people, and helps in the transforming of other people that I'm, of course, dedicated my life to.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to say here, because the death of Maya was traumatic. So if you as a listener, this is the first time that you hear Turiya speak, we're not going to go into the story. This is in another episode. But to understand this, there was trauma and there was death and there was grief. And I think in terms of the relationship with time heals, it's also really important to say what you're doing, because this is pivotal. Like I understand fully what this means to be not just engaging in grief and trauma, but also with the work that you're doing. And it has to do with the self, it has to do with essence, and it has to do most recently with death and with trauma. So with all of that in mind, of what you're teaching, take us in a little bit on how that has helped you over the past years to shape that experience of from where you were 2 years ago to where you are today. Because one of the key things you said, that dealing with that aloneness, and I think that is an interesting thing as well to get a little bit more flesh on the bone, as to say.
I mean, there's two things. First of all, also with the death of my husband, of course, you don't really realize how traumatized you are. I was numb for a while. Of course, you go on, you do the work. You don't. When he died, it was in 1981, so we were not even aware of trauma then. Mm-hmm. But when I look back, I can realize that was a big trauma. It changed my life completely. Mm-hmm. But now, this 2 years ago, was so intense, and it even, I wake up sometimes in the night and I just see, her lying there face down, and I wake up with that kind of traumatic night. I mean, wake always in the middle of the night, those pictures come up, and that slowly over time and over, I call it sensitive attunement towards my inner, that has changed. And in the beginning, of course, it is the loss and the aloneness is just loneliness. It's not even aloneness. It's just the pain of loneliness, the pain of missing, the pain of, there's just somebody not there anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so unbelievably, how to understand that? We can't really, And then on the other hand, attuning to that now, the loneliness more and more becomes aloneness, that I go for walks, I connect with nature, I work in the work, I really of course, what comes through me gets also put into other people. So that's very important, that I have a function here, or a destiny, let's call it, or whatever you want to call it. But it is something that I do that really connects me to the pain of other people through deep understanding, And on the other hand, it is also realizing that, we can't get away from death. It is part of our life.
Yeah.
It is so, and it's not even such a big thing. It's just that we're trying to pretend we're not. But it actually is part of who we are. And this is, I more and more understand and comprehend that in myself. It is part of my love also. So huge download of understanding and of insights and of realizations, really. Today I can say death is my greatest teacher.
Yeah, I love that sentence. I think you said that before.
So much, I learned so much from that realization. And we're trying, and of course our ego identity tries to get away from it, wants to have pleasure and some fun and but it doesn't work anymore. Once you tasted it to that depth, for me at least, you can't get away from it anymore. And that's the beautiful thing also.
I think we spoke, I'm not sure if I spoke to you about that before, where they did some research on the brain's capacity or ability to shy away from anything relating to death to the self. So they made tests where they showed people pictures relating death to themselves, and they measured the brain activity, and they could realize that the brain was turning away from, and as if it was, or I'm using lay words here as I'm not the researcher here, but the brain was saying, okay, this has nothing to do with me. So it was like, this is an inbuilt capacity in ourselves to say, no, death, not with me. And I guess when I look at you and I, with the understanding and the closeness we have with death, it's like, this doesn't function anymore. Mm-hmm. One thing you said, which I'm interested in, because many people will experience that, and so would you describe the picture that came at the beginning often of seeing her? And I would term this flashbacks, and I guess many people would have this as well as a form of rumination or flashbacks that they have. Post-traumatic stress is part of it. So what would you say, besides time, has helped your system to have less of those flashbacks?
I somehow accepted it, as part of the process. I think my biggest understanding in those state is that grief is a state of being. It's not just something that happens to you once in a while, but it is just like love is a state of being, and so is grief. Grief is inbuilt in our system. There will be a day when we lose something. Even if we lose our youth or our middle age or our bodies, the appearance of our body, we constantly lose something. Yeah. So I think grieving is a very, very important process. And for me to give myself this space and, as I worked much, much less, and to really take as much time as it needs, I was like, whatever. If this takes on forever, it's also nice. Why not? And that creates a certain containment, and that, of course, creates, I think, acceptance is so important. Nobody can tell you about grief anyway. You have to be with it in your own way. And, of course, it's also what connects you to that person, in one way. And then in another way, of course, the love also connects you to that person. And then something else connects you to life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also to let that also be there, the connection to life, to other people, to friends, and you cannot compare. That's comparison is the biggest downfall in that whole thing, Even in connection with people, I can't compare. If once I compare, it's finished, because
you mean
the mind has...
grief, or?
No, compare love or compare connections or compare meetings. You can't. Because nobody, especially when somebody is dead, nobody can ever live up to that, because you're also idealizing it to a certain extent, know.
So what you said, it propelled me to think. You said before, like the ego actually is made to sort of shy away from death. We don't want to get that into our mind as a possibility. And similarly, what you said about accepting it as a state of being and accepting it for as long it wants to be here as it would be. And I think there, I was just thinking, probably many people, or most, or all, I don't know, in the same way as we want nothing to do with grief, with death, we actually don't want nothing to do with hard emotions. And one of them is the summary of all the emotions that we call grief. Would you say that to be accurate?
Of course. I mean, our whole ego conditioning is around avoid pain and suffering and try to find some kind of relief, happiness, whatever you want to call it. And that might be addiction, that might be eating. I mean, our whole life goes into that direction.
Yeah. Away from pain towards pleasure.
Yeah, away from suffering, and of course, suffering is, or pain is not, you can't avoid it. It is just like that. It is part of life. It is part of who we are. It's part of being here. Of course, it's not only, but it is also part of life, and so we just, in the working with people, we just did a week on the green on sensitive attunement. And for me, that is one of the ways how I meet myself with that sensitive attunement to what actually is there, and be kind towards that, whatever that is. Even if it's your deepest pain or your deepest longing or your deepest love, but it just to turn within and get to know who we are, not through the eyes of the other always, or through advertisement, or through what my mother wants me to be, and conditioning.
So for those people interested in working with people, you'll find a link in the show notes to have a little bit more of an insight into what it is. I'm also really interested in the two last workshops that I know that you've been teaching this year. One was on trauma and one was on death, which is obviously the two main topics that we're talking about here, and how to deal with grief and trauma. Would you mind taking us a little bit into the work of trauma and essence and the work on death that you have been teaching?
Well, let's talk the work on death first. That, there are two different aspects, because death you have no control over. Yeah, death comes, and I'm trying to find a way to be inclusive into that. We will all eventually, this body will go. It's just there is no safety when you meet death. The safety is an illusion. We're trying to control life, and we do all kinds of things. We think if I have enough money, then I won't die. But it's not true. It made me really slim down my life in so many ways. Why should I possess something? Why? For what? It's not needed. You just need the necessary to live well, and that's it. All the other stuff is just an illusion. Try to not ever go, And then on the other hand, when you work with trauma, because trauma is so overwhelming often, we do try to create a certain safety. So it's just an opposite way of dealing with things, We create a safety so that you can deal with the enormity of the event. Yeah, so that we are not going out of the body when that happens. What I for sure did, I just was like, it was too much for me to handle, in both cases. So, and then you have to come out of that dissociated space, and therefore you need a certain safety or nature, or you need to be in some kind of environment that makes you feel safe enough to land here again. But at the same time, of course, when that happened, the awareness of death is there. So it's almost impossible to find safety. Mm-hmm. Because safety is just an illusory concept. Yeah, but of course, when we work with abuse, with, let's say, children or young people, or sexual abuse, that is what people lost. And in order to be here, I need to feel safe so that I can feel my body again. Otherwise I'm not here. I'm just dissociated, and I'm flying around in the cosmos thinking I'm half enlightened, but it's just a dissociated state. Mm-hmm. So how to bring those two things together? And that's what I've been looking at, and I thought that's really, really interesting, how to make those two things side by side. But then what I found, what was for me most, that is my latest insight, is we have a need to connect. Yeah, we want to connect. We want to connect. We want somebody to meet you, not a lover, but a connection. Once we connect deeply, even in our deepest pain, even in our greatest joy, once that connection happens, once somebody is with you and says, hey, I'm with you, I hold your hand, then we can walk through any trauma. But trauma exists because we were left alone.
Exactly.
And that was the worst thing that happened in trauma. There was nobody there. Even you talked to your mom and said, hey, baba, it's happening, dad is doing this to me, whatever. They were completely, you're stupid, don't say those stupid things, it's your father, the story. Once somebody is really with you, not just superficially, therapeutically, but really humanly say, hey, I'm here with you in that very, very isolated place, then we can move through any trauma. So for me, the connection was the big key, and that's what I've been working with in the last month. It's like once people connect, then that isolation opens up. Once the isolation opens up, I'm here. Once I'm here, I can feel, however deep the pain is. But then the feelings move through. The worst thing is the isolation. Mm. Yeah, and that's the worst what happened, and the dissociation. And then we go, oops, then we go into this kind of weird, dissociated, and then, space where we think we're half enlightened, but of course it's not. So that's what I've been working with in the last month. I was like, yeah, that's it.
I smile over here. People don't see that, but now they hear it, because in the last few months I have been diving into polyvagal certification. So I have had this polyvagal lens on for the last 6 years through Somatic Experience. But now I have been diving deep into polyvagal certification with Stephen Porges and so forth. And it's those two things that, safety and connection, those two words that always come back to this is what's at the center, because we lost connection, we lost safety. It's sort of the simple definition of trauma. So when you're saying that and the inside, and so I see this parallel, which I'm always giddy with when speaking with you, because there's this shared experience around death, trauma, loss, grief.
Yeah, I've been diving into the polyvagal also, and I really like Stephen Porges. He's just a very human and very warm-hearted person, just how he is. And that was part of what I thought, wow, that is it. And then he talks about that connection. We want to belong. We need that connection, otherwise we'll never come out of the story. Never, ever. No matter how many good techniques you have and, resource yourself, all these kind of things. It's not enough. We need that connection. And then we can deal with the rest of the story. But he really embodies that for me, because he has that warm-hearted, and yet he is a scientist, but he's so approachable. He's not so, even though he's a fantastic scientist. And then the sound of the voice and how you talk, and then I do a lot of mumbled sounds. I guess it's part of aging or something, or it comes to me. And then it's a wonderful way to connect, because it connects through cultures and through different races. That's everybody will hear that when you go, no matter if you're black or white or green or yellow or whatever. Here's so many wonderful things to say hello to.
They actually talk about those sounds that you were just making, or that these sounds are actually understandable among cultures or across cultures.
Exactly.
and things. So there's a name for that. But anyway, that was one of the exercises we did as part of the certification. I think for people also to understand that whatever the reaction that they have to death, dying, trauma, it is normal and based on the nervous system trying to deal what is happening, and it's their nervous system. Stephen Porges always talks about the nervous system, or Deb Down about the nervous system being the intervening system that makes what comes and reacts to it. And the main things we know is fight, flight, or freeze, but there's blended states as you can react to that. And for people to say, well, dissociation is like probably the best way to survive what has happened to you in that moment. But then the question is, how do we come out of it? How do we come back into the body to actually integrate it?
That maybe is the most difficult, because when you're dissociated, and I know for myself, I of course learned that as a survival mechanism way before death met me. But when you're dissociated, you don't know you're dissociated. That's the problem. You think everything's fine. You're just a little bit more, but you don't know that you're distant.
Exactly.
And that's the problem. You don't know, so you won't look for help, but you just feel a little bit more remote, And then, of course, if somebody close to you dies, you go into this terrible loneliness feelings, and then mostly that is the body saying, hey, I'm here, connect with me, say hello. Then we hate that loneliness is so unbearable. The unbearable loneliness of being, I've been through so many of those moments where you go like, oh my God, I'm not going to survive that feeling ever, and then to learn slowly say, okay, this comes, this will also go. But it's delicate, and I think it's good if people get some professional help, if they have a good therapist who's with them every week and helps them slowly to land here, It's not so easy, I think, because when you're dissociated, you're gone.
Yeah.
But you feel good. That's the problem. You feel okay, let's say.
I share a personal experience because this was one of the tipping points or realization points for me, which was so beautiful, which was with you. You might remember, as part of the Working with People group we had was these small groups where we practiced the working with people skills and essence work. And as part of that, I was, in that specific moment, I was a client, and my so-called therapist in that moment, you were coaching them as to what you felt and saw. And because I think we react quite similarly, you actually named the functional freeze, which I call it now, that I went in, which I was completely unaware of, because it was so good. No one noticed the little things that I did or didn't do that kept me safe. Sort of move my chair a little bit backwards or sit so that I was facing the window. And so you named those, but because I wasn't in the center of attention in terms of facing you, I wasn't even looking at you. I was, my healthy adult self was like saying, that's true, I'll look at that. So it allowed me to get an awareness over that state that normally, because I'm in freeze, I don't get. But because you were talking to the person next to you and explaining what was happening over here on my chair, I could simultaneously look at myself from a third person.
It's interesting, no? But yeah, it's so hard to notice those little signs, I noticed maybe a year after Maya died, I had a bodywork session, massage session, and then the guy said to me, you don't feel anything, no? When somebody touches me physically, because we were physically so close, I was completely shut down. I didn't want to be touched. I didn't want to be met on that level, And then I realized that the body has gone into, how to survive this. Yeah, freezing, disconnect. And I'm sure many people feel that. And in that loneliness, then if you then don't do something that is that means something for you. You don't do some work, or you do. The other thing that really saves me is creativity. I paint, and when I paint, suddenly in that creativity, something else happens. Suddenly I'm like, wow, I'm creating something. How How wonderful is that? And then some different light shows up, and that is my own inner, whatever you want to call that, light, and that also changed. So if you're creative, you become part of creation, and that moves, it makes life worth living. But of course, if you're dissociated and then you feel resigned with life, or your work is a hangdog, or, very difficult to get out of it. It's good, I think it's really good to get help, in those, and just to have 2 years, have somebody with you who you trust and who you love dearly and deeply and who loves you, and then move through it, help you to come out of those spaces and understand it even.
Yeah, it's that part of connection that helps. And in a therapeutic alignment, hopefully if it's a good therapeutic alignment, is for people to get that safety and connection in one place, that they can say, yes, I can meet whatever it is, and this person is there, not needing to fix or fade me, but actually just there with me.
Exactly. And understand what is dissociation, understand that where we go, and even, I'm not really here, even though I feel quite okay, a little distant, da-di-da-di-da. That's the problem, and then suddenly, I'm not really here.
Yeah. So
and that's what last 2 years was slowly coming back here again. I'm probably not
100% here yet.
I'm still kind of battling once in a while with those things, but I feel more here, and I feel more in surrendering to creativity, to life, and knowing this will go, always. It's always with me, and that guides my meditations,
So when I came across the term functional freeze, it sort of clicked for me to understand, okay, this really relates to me, because I'm so good in freezing that I don't even notice, but no one else notices, because I'm still here, I'm still functioning, but actually, as you were describing so beautifully, some parts of me are actually numb or not here. And we could talk more about that. But the other thing that I really want to understand a little bit more, because of my background, but also other people might be interested in that, the connection between essence and trauma. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
Well, how to bridge that right now? I mean, mostly it is, mostly we lose our connection to our essential being. And for some people, that is really traumatizing, and in a way, our whole life is about trying to come back to who I truly am. So in a whole, and in that is included dissociation, trauma, and whatever else happens to you. And for some people, the trauma is so intense that they lose the particular quality of their essence. They lose courage, for instance. Mm-hmm. They just lose the red is courage, the aliveness, the vitality, the passionate, the engagement in life. And people just lose that particular quality of essence. And that's what they actually have to embody into their life again. But for some people, they just lose it. They cannot find that passion for life again. Or for some people, especially with death, people lose joy. Joy is a quality of essence. For some people, they cannot ever feel joy again, because that is so connected to the loss of their child or their partner. That is too painful to feel that. So then you see if you can come home to that joyfulness again as a quality of essence. That sits in my body. The essence sits on my left side and is around my heart. And of course, then we have to deal with all the pains in our heart, and then we're back to grieving, and then we're back to the loss of somebody that you love dearly, for instance, so then we have to deal with those issues.
Makes a lot of sense.
And trauma is the same issues. It's just some of the connection to that essential quality, it seems to be completely lost. Because the intensity of the trauma that happened, the loss, or like with you, like losing a child. It's just beyond words. It's just beyond anything ever can even put into words. So, and then it needs that caring connection, slowness, step by step by step, where we then slowly come back to that joyful essence, not joyful at being in a party and whatever, drinking a lot of alcohol or whatever, but the joy inside of yourself, that is more like a state of feeling care-free, not careless. Yeah. So, and then we play through those different, and that's the essence work. Then we look at what is how do we fill the holes of not having joy? Yeah. So we become so-called free, and we go to parties and we try to prove ourselves. I have celebration, but it's often careless. And real joy is something very, very, very subtle and sensitive, and it's carefree. I don't care what you think about me or what other people judge me, so I can sing my song. And that's the creativity thing that comes in. It's just once that creative thing comes in me, I always go like, wow, I'm so lucky I can paint, and I'm completely mindless when I paint. How lucky is that? And then suddenly something happens. It's like as if something else speaks through you, and then okay, and then I'm connected more to the essential being, whatever you call that, myself, the point of light, however we call that. It's so fascinating when it suddenly shows up, but in between you have to deal with all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Aloneness, loneliness, and the loneliness sometimes is unbearable, really. It's just like, oof. And, okay, what to do? Gotta go through it, can't get away from it. Mm-hmm. And that's also where often dissociation, then people go into meditation, and then, of course, they try to spiritual bypass the suffering and the pain. It's very common. People want to get away from it, and then you become a Buddhist, and you do the vows and dub. You try to get away from the pain of life, of the pain of being here, and it is part of what we experience as human beings. We will all have some loss. It's just unavoidable.
Mm-hmm. As always, I could continue speaking about it with you on all kinds of the different elements of the shape of the crystal I call the different ways. But for now, for today, thank you so much, Turiya, for again.
Thank you. It was really inspiring talking to you.
It always is.
I hope I didn't blubber too much.
Well, and those people who think it's blubber, they can go to another episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Thank you so much. It was really wonderful. Wonderful meeting you.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.